So a bunch of moves just went down today around the NFL, with some being more surprising than others. Several players were released, a couple others are on the trade block, and a fan favorite just signed with a team that made the playoffs only last year. And with the pieces coming together, it's becoming clear more moves are soon on the way. So let's talk about all that and more right after. Alright, first up, the Green Bay Packers officially released cornerback Jaire Alexander today. He's been in trade rumors all offseason long. Then back just a couple weeks ago, there were talks of a potential restructure to try and keep him in Green Bay because he signed a pretty big contract in recent years. Ultimately, the decision was made to release him, and doing so is going to save them over $17 million in each of the next 2 seasons. So this was really a no-brainer move, even though they will still have to take on some dead money by doing so. Jaire is extremely talented. He's made 2 All-Pro teams in his career, but the problem is he's missed over 30 games in the last 4 seasons and played just 7 in each of the last 2 years. He's dealt with all kinds of injuries from his shoulder, back, knee, groin. Makes me feel like I'm singing the song Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes to my kids, but either way, it is not great. That's the reason why the Packers moved on and why no teams were willing to trade for him and have to deal with his contract. But now, after being released and that contract being a thing of the past, any deal for Alexander would likely be very affordable to whichever team ends up getting him. Spotrac predicts that his next contract will be a 1-year deal that maxes out around $10 million with incentives. Again, Spotrac is a very rough guesstimate, but that's a pretty low-risk deal for any team with cap space in need of corner help. After all, he's still just 28 years old, so I guarantee you at least one team will end up talking themselves into taking a chance on him. The Buffalo Bills reportedly had trade talks around him earlier this offseason, but Jordan Schultz reported that those talks fell through, and the Bills ultimately moved on. That was also before the draft, and since then, Buffalo spent a first-round pick on cornerback Maxwell Hairston, so who knows if they would still even be interested in Jaire. Whether it's Buffalo or somebody else, he'll definitely be on some team soon. He's way too talented and still young enough that a handful of teams will be interested in his services and hope he can stay healthy. For the Packers, their attention now shifts to offensive lineman Elgton Jenkins, who appears to be in a bit of a hold in. He didn't show up for OTAs, but did show up for mandatory minicamp, however, is not expected to participate in any practices. The reason for him holding in is contractual, but it's a little more nuanced than that. Basically, Jenkins has primarily played guard for his entire career, yet the Packers plan on moving him to center after they signed guard Aaron Banks in free agency. Jenkins is fine with changing positions, but what he's reportedly not fine with is the lesser pay that comes with being a center. He still has 2 years left on his current deal, so this isn't about money now per se, but about future earnings. He may be looking to restructure his current deal, but the challenge with that is the Packers hardly ever adjust contracts with more than 1 year remaining, according to Rob Demovsky. A solution that Rob proposed, though, was to guarantee some of the remaining $33-ish million on the current deal. That would at least give Elton a bit more security in the short term. We'll see how it plays out, though. It's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening. Moving on, though, on top of Jaire Alexander, another defensive player that just got released today was former Bengals linebacker Germaine Pratt. He actually requested a trade back in February, so some kind of a move was definitely expected here. Since he then drafted 2 linebackers in April, one in the 2nd round and one in the 4th, so the writing did seem to be on the wall here for Germaine. They also saved over $5.5 million in cap space by releasing him, and this gives them a little more wiggle room, maybe for a potential Trey Hendrickson contract if they can ever come to an agreement. And while the Bengals knew and planned for Pratt to be gone, it's still a blow to their defense that struggled big time last year even with him on the team. Pratt had arguably his best individual season as a pro. He led the team in tackles with 143, had 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 interceptions. Well, they better hope they can work out a deal with Trey Hendrickson, because if they don't, they could then find themselves without their sack leader and tackling leader from last season. I do think Trey Hendrickson most likely stays with them this year unless they for some reason trade him, but still, it's not ideal for a team whose biggest weakness was their defense last year. As far as Pratt, though, he, just like Jaire, shouldn't have any problem finding a new team, as he's only 29 years old and has been incredibly durable throughout his career, missing just 4 games in 6 seasons. Back to Alexander for a second, though, because the release of him might hurt the trade market for Jalen Ramsey, who is reportedly staying away from mandatory camp, as both he and the Dolphins have said it's over. Prior to the release of Jaire, Ramsey was probably the biggest remaining veteran that could be available, but if you had to choose between somebody like Jaire for a one-year deal worth up to $10-ish million, that's with incentives built in, a bit of a risky move, but also involves no draft capital at all. Or you got to give up draft capital and acquire Jalen Ramsey for something around $21 million. I don't know. That is a pretty tough pill to swallow. Next up, let's flip over to the offensive side of the ball and talk about a certain running back. That would be Nick Chubb, who is reportedly signing with the Houston Texans on a one-year deal. He's been an unrestricted free agent as his contract with the Browns expired, and with them drafting both Quinshaw Judkins and Dylan Sampson in April, still crazy to think about that they drafted 2 running backs and 2 quarterbacks. Cleveland, what are you doing? Either way, when they drafted 2 running backs, that was pretty much the final seal on Chubb's career with the Browns. He quickly became one of the greatest running backs in Cleveland franchise history, as he's actually 3rd in both rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. He was 4 yards shy of 1,000 his rookie year, then he rattled off 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons before suffering that gruesome leg injury in week 2 of the 2023 season. It was the same knee that he injured in college, so there was a fair amount of concern there, with some even not sure if Chubb would ever return to play football again. Well, he ended up defying the odds and made his return week 7 of the 2024 season, playing in 8 games before sadly breaking his foot and landing on injured reserve. The injury history is definitely concerning, but he'll be far from a workhorse back in Houston. Joe Mixon will be the lead back once again. Then they have Dameon Pierce in the mix as well. Chubb will probably rotate in a bit here, but his days of getting 15 to 20 carries a game are most likely behind him. He's also valuable veteran depth in case injuries hit the room, and as we know in the NFL, you can never have too much valuable depth. And regardless of how the Texans plan on using Chubb, we do know the details of his contract. Doesn't break the bank or anything like that, but it's a decent amount for Chubb, who's had quite the injury history himself. It's a one-year, $2.5 million base that can be worth up to $5 million in incentives. So again, far from breaking the bank for the Texans, similar to the numbers of Aaron Rodgers and his new one-year deal and how it doesn't break the bank with the Steelers. A couple months ago on the Pat McAfee show, Rodgers said he'd be willing to play for $10 million wherever he ends up, and the final number is actually pretty close to that. It's a one-year deal worth $13.85 million with $10 million fully guaranteed and then another $5.85 million in potential incentives. This is actually a really reasonable deal, especially when you look at what some other quarterbacks have gotten on one-year deals recently. Sam Darnold, for instance, signed a one-year $10 million deal with Minnesota last offseason. Then Daniel Jones just signed a one-year $14 million deal with the Colts this offseason. And with Rodgers finally signing with Pittsburgh, another quarterback to keep your eye on is going to be Kirk Cousins. The Steelers were reportedly eyeing him as a potential plan B if the deal with Rodgers ended up falling through. But now that obviously he signed on the dotted line and became a Steeler for sure, that just cleared via the transaction report I just saw on Twitter. That's one less team that makes sense for a Kirk trade. In fact, at this point in the offseason, I don't know that any team makes any sense here to try and trade for Kirk Cousins. Several teams expressed interest earlier on in the offseason, but the Falcons have reportedly been unwilling to eat any of his salary in a trade, which has held things up. Kirk prefers to be traded to a team, though, where he can start, but that is looking less and less likely now. The Browns were a team that was talked about as a possibility, but they've since drafted not one but 2 quarterbacks and have a 4-way competition going on right now. The Saints have an obvious need with Derek Carr retiring, but they did draft Tyler Shuck in the 2nd round, though he is for sure far from a sure thing. The only problem with a potential Kirk Cousins trade to the Falcons is that the Falcons and Saints are division rivals, so trading them what would in all likelihood be their starting quarterback seems pretty unlikely. That is, unless New Orleans makes them an offer they can't refuse and are willing to take on the entirety of Kirk's contract, which carries a $27.5 million base salary for 2025. It is so much money. At this point, it looks like the Falcons are content with holding on to him this season as Michael Penix's backup, and with Penix's history, his injury history through college rather, there's no guarantee that he holds up all season. Kirk would be a high-quality backup in the event of an injury for sure. Atlanta could also use him as trade bait if another team loses their starting quarterback to injury before the trade deadline, and honestly, that could actually be something that plays out. If a team with playoff aspirations loses their starter, for example, they could get aggressive and be willing to trade for Kirk in the middle of the season. As for right now, it looks like Kirk is stuck in Atlanta behind Michael Penix. I'm sure he's hoping he's not there for long. Staying in the NFC South, Bucs wide receiver Chris Godwin signed an extension with the team earlier this offseason, with initial reports saying he took a discount to remain in Tampa. But now we know he took a pretty decent discount, all things considered. The contract Godwin signed was a 3-year, $66 million deal, with 44 of it being guaranteed. So that's $22 million average per year, a very healthy contract for a guy coming off of a season-ending ankle injury. Well, it was revealed today that the New England Patriots actually offered him $30 million per year on a multi-year deal. That's the difference of $8 million APY. Chris spoke with his wife, though, and after talking everything over, they decided they would rather take a decent amount less to stay in Tampa Bay, remaining with the team that drafted him back in 2017. I'm not sure how many years were in the Patriots offer, but if it was a 3-year deal, that would have been $90 million in total, as opposed to the $66 million from the Bucs. It is important to keep in mind, though, that Florida has no state income tax, whereas Massachusetts has one of the highest state income taxes in the country. But still, it's clear that Godwin wanted to stay with Tampa because they didn't even go back and forth with the Patriots to try and negotiate more money. Instead, he re-signed with the Bucs, and the Patriots pivoted to another receiver coming off of an injury in Stefon Diggs. He's coming off of that ACL tear, but has honestly looked pretty good out there during OTAs so far, and also at minicamp today. They signed him to a 3-year, $69 million deal, so much less in total than they reportedly offered Godwin, even though if you look at Diggs' contract, there's not a ton of guarantees in there. It's also not guaranteed that Diggs couldn't be in trouble this season because of the recent drama that he went through after he was seen on camera handing out some unidentified pink substance to a few women on a boat. Diggs has stayed in action with the Patriots at OTAs after this, though, and no punishment should be coming from the Patriots at this point in time, from what I can tell. If anything comes about from this, it'll be from the NFL, though it's going to be basically impossible for them to prove what he gave out on that boat was anything illegal. Mike Vrabel spoke about Diggs today and said he's working hard, though he's not fully cleared for just full participation with that ACL, and they are currently trying to figure out what exactly his role is going to be on offense. Regardless, Diggs is going to be a great option out there for Drake May this upcoming season. Anyway, while we saw a bunch of moves happen today around the NFL, more could happen very soon as teams look to shore up some quote-unquote weak spots along their rosters via some veteran free agency additions. In fact, I'm sure more could very well happen this week, and if they do, I'll be sure to keep you all updated every step of the way. And with that, I'll see y'all next time.